Matthew 16. If you're a father of younger ones, keep going. If you're a father of adolescents, we're praying for you. If you're a father of grown children, if you've never been a father, you had a father. And one thing that just sticks out for me all the time with Mother's Day and Father's Day is the lessons that you learn about how God cares for you. And because the sacrifices that parents do, the kids are always on your mind. And when you get phone calls of this and that, and you hear just different things like that, God is our Father. So happy Father's Day to you. It goes quick. If you're a father of young ones, it goes quick, very, very quick. And we heard that. Lynn and I heard that. Oh, you hold on to them; they go quick. Yeah, it goes quick. And if you have grown kids, you know, it just zooms right by. So happy Father's Day. Matthew 16. We find ourselves in about halfway through the ministry of Jesus. And let me make sure my phone is turned off. We find ourselves about halfway through the ministry of Jesus. And to this point, none of the 12, none of the disciples have acknowledged with like a full-blown cognitive decision that Jesus is the Son of God. They just haven't done that yet. You read early in John that John the Baptist, when he sees Jesus, I'm talking like very, very early in the ministry, John the Baptist says, "Behold, the Lamb of God that takes away." He acknowledges, but none of the 12. So where we find ourselves is to this point, and it's a familiar passage, but it's actually going to land square for us in mid-June of 2020, because we're going to look at an Old Testament passage that talks about civil unrest. Never, ever, ever thought that I would see on an ongoing basis what we've been seeing. I just never thought it. And it's not just this flare-up. I think this is a fundamental. This is a mile marker in our existence as a country. It's happened before, and it's happened before in the Old Testament. That's what we're going to get to. Matthew 16, verse 13. Verse 13. When Jesus came to the region, is this mic too hot? No. Okay. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" What are they saying about me? Not that Jesus cared. Not that he was curious, like, what are they saying about me? But he just asked the question to prime the pump for them. They replied, "Some say John the Baptist." Now, I just referenced John the Baptist, and early in the ministry of Jesus, John the Baptist was alive. But by the time you get to this point, John the Baptist was imprisoned, and he was beheaded. So he's dead. So you have, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others, Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. Dead, 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 dead. They're all dead. The Jews of that time, most of them, did not believe in reincarnation. Some of them did not believe in resurrection. But they did believe, almost universally, they believed that the spirit of someone, the very specific personality and spirit of someone can go on in someone else. Some kind of mystical equation that they had was a common, like a wives' tale type deal. But they just thought, well, maybe it's one of the prophets that has come back to life. So that's what their answer is for the folks. What about you? Who do you say I am? Simon Peter answered, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. So there you have it. So there's your recognition that Jesus is Messiah, that Jesus is Christ. One is Greek, one is Hebrew. That he is the Christ. And that's coming forth from Peter. That's significant. It's well to the point where verse 17. Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man. You didn't hear this on the street, but by my Father in heaven. It's a spirit thing. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock, Caesarea Philippi, most of the towns back in the day were built on packed ground. Caesarea Philippi, the region, a lot of the little towns were built on rock. So some folks say, oh, on this rock, up in this town, where this is where the church will be. No, it's Peter, and it's not built on Peter. It's not going to be built on a personality, but on this rock, on this expression, on this confession, that's what the church is about. On this rock, I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail or will not overcome it. It's not that the Satan or hell's going to challenge God, but hell is nothing. Satan is nothing. I will give you the keys, the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Some good deep thought we can look at another time. Then he warned his disciples not to tell anyone he was the Christ. So let's review. Who do they say? What do you say? Don't tell anybody. Blessed are you, Peter. That's awesome. Now don't tell anybody. If you look a couple paragraphs down, chapter 7, look at the title there. The Transfiguration. So we have two significant events. It's chronological right here. We have two significant events, and there's supposed to be some silence involved with it. From that time on, halfway through the ministry, from that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, teachers of the law. Well, wait a second. You're going to be celebrated. You're going to be the king. You're going to be this new kingdom, the new Israel. King Solomon, King David, in that type. Nope, going to suffer. And he must be killed, and on the third day be raised to life. Did you ever get bad advice? Have you ever gotten bad advice? I'm going to show a clip, I hope. We've had a little troubles this morning. We're going to show a clip of maybe not advice, but some help from friends that you don't want. I'm going to have the audio down because I don't know if there's bad language. When I watched this on my friend's Facebook thing, I kind of chuckled. Vic, I thought of you. You or Tommy might do in helping each other. Barry and Alan, back in the day. I'm not going to say who's the troublemaker here, but if we'll just watch this, you just got pointed at there, Barry. Take a look at this. Vic and Baker and Tommy, you remember Richie Miller and Danny Miller? This actually happened. Keep talking. It's not going to happen. I'm hearing go, go, go. Here it comes. It's coming on slowly. If you can't see that from where you are, let's stop it right there if you can. No stopping. And then the final exclamation mark is, oh. If you can't see what happened, there was a Jeep that was going up a hill and got rolled onto its side. And the advice and the help is from the gang. Hey, we'll help you, bro. And Danny Miller, they flipped their Jeep over and it rolled over and it was in neutral. and it went straight down their hill. I don't know if you remember their house, their property, and the only large tree on their property, it bent around that. Hey, we can look at here. Oh, yep, this guy. Oh, yeah, yep, I'm out of here. They meant well. And the idea was like, we'll flip you back over, and not really thinking of physics. And like, if it's on a hill that's already rolled over, these things are basically cubes, and it just might suspension kick itself over. Didn't think about that. The guy apparently took the advice. Yeah, come on, help me out. Look at verse 22. Peter means so well. And it's not really advice as much as what we're going to read, as much as it's an objection. He doesn't really advise God what's going to happen. He just objects to what Jesus says. Before we start at verse 52 again, I'll point you back to where he says, verse 17, "Blessed are you, Simon. You're awesome. On this rock, on this confession, I'm going to build my church, that I'm the Messiah." That's where it's at. Verse 22, Peter took him aside, began to rebuke him. Get your language. Peter began to rebuke God, if you will. "Never, Lord. This shall never happen to you." Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." So we have, in a matter of 5 or 6 sentences, "Blessed are you, Peter. Get behind me, Satan." It's a pretty strong rebuke. It's a pretty strong objection followed by an even stronger rebuke. You do not have in mind the things of God. You're not really going to help me out flipping this thing back over. You're going to make it worse. But you have the things of men. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "If anyone..." Well, that's a universal term. I looked right at Red, looked right up at me. If anyone, that means you. That means you. That means you. If anyone would come after me, would follow me, would call me Lord, well, that's me, and that's you. He must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me will find it. So Jesus suddenly goes from a few sentences earlier talking about his death, look here, to a few sentences under talking about your death. You must deny yourself and take up your cross. And I've said it before, but it's worth repeating, that this phrase that we use, especially when like Lynn and I are around, and I pick on Lynn, and everybody, oh, you have your cross to bear. Lynn has her cross to bear. Oh, poor Lynn, poor Lynn, poor Lynn. Yeah, but that's a misapplication of having a cross to bear. Like a cross to bear, typically in our culture means we all have something we have to deal with, and that's inaccurate. When Jesus says take up your cross, we've talked about it. It means that you must die. You must go away, and then the resurrected you, your new life in Christ, goes about. So you're animated, you're alive, but it's no longer you who live, but what? Christ who lives through you. Take up your cross. Verse 26, "What good will it be for a man if he gains the whole world, yet forfeits his soul? Or what can a man give in exchange for his soul?" Joe's going to talk here in a little bit about his pickers, Pabst pickers. And Friday was the first day. Yesterday was a killer day. And there's an exchange. When someone comes up to the counter, I want this, will cost you this. There's an exchange. What will a man exchange for his soul? What's the give? Under the old covenant, there seemed to be a pushing back of sin by way of sacrifices. Is that going to work in the new covenant? No. So what do you give in exchange for a soul? You give your life. You must die. Well, that kind of runs counter to American culture. But this bad advice that Peter attempts to give Jesus is nothing new. If you'll turn to 1 Kings chapter 11. 1 Kings chapter 11. And I'll let you get there because it's a longer passage I want to read, and I just want you to see it in print. And if you don't have a Bible with you, there are Bibles in front of you in the pew. Please turn there. 1 Kings chapter 11. While you're getting there, and you might have to go to the table of contents. I did that halfway through college, so that's not a problem. 1 Kings chapter 11. Where are we? What's going on? We're about 930 years prior to where Jesus just talked with Peter. So we'll say 1,000 years. 1,000 years before they're up in Caesarea Philippi. We have this scenario. And what's going on is David became king. He was anointed king. Remember, it was King Saul, and David was anointed and he killed Goliath and all that. When David grew up, he became king. He became king. He passed away. Solomon has become king. And David, are you still with me? David was not permitted to build the temple. So the ark was still in this tabernacle, in this temporary traveling deal. Because David had blood on his hands. And so God said, you killed so many people, you can't. But your son. So Solomon built the temple. And it took him, what, was it 7 years, Arlen? Too long. I think it took him about 7 years. Too long. No. Silence. Took about 7 years. But more than that. Are you still? Look here. It took all kind of money to build that project. And then, after Solomon built the temple, Solomon went on to build many, many, many other government buildings. Oh, about a chapter before where we are, it talks about all the wealth that Solomon had coming in by way of taxes. Talked about... Yeah, I did. Anyway, Solomon, near the end of his life, 1 year income from gold alone, I crunched the numbers, 55 tons of gold, and I crunched the numbers, $66 million a year coming in from gold alone by way of taxes. Do you think we're taxed a lot in Pennsylvania? I made a trip in the middle of the Corolla, whatever the virus is. I made a trip out to Illinois, and I at one point paid $1.19 for a gallon of gas. And you have to realize, that was in Ohio, I think. You have to realize that a good chunk of that was taxes. Pennsylvania is 30 cents higher on a gas than if you go down to... if you cross any state line, you drop 30 cents. If you're real close, maybe not that quick, but Pennsylvania is taxed over and over and over again. That's what's going on in Israel when we read this passage. Chapter 11, verse 41. Solomon's death. As for the other events of Solomon's reign, all he did and the wisdom he displayed, very wise people would come from all over the world to hear his wisdom. Are they not written in the book of the Annals of Solomon? In other words, there's your books, there are history books you can read about Solomon. Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel. That's a foreshadowing of not all Israel. For 40 years. Then he rested with his father, that's the Bible way of saying he died, and was buried in the city of David, his father, and Rehoboam, there's confusing names here, at least for me, Rehoboam, the son, we'll call him Reby. Reby, his son, succeeded him as king. Now look down at verse 1. Rehoboam went to Shechem for all the Israelites, inclusive, for all the Israelites had gone there to make him king. Now drop down to verse 6, 12:6. Then King Rehoboam, so you have Solomon dying, you have Rehoboam, Rebi coming up, he's the new king. King Rehoboam consulted with the elders who had served his father Solomon during his lifetime. How would you advise me to answer these people? They replied, well, they got together and said, please lighten the taxes on us. And please reduce the taxes on us. So King Rebi, he says, how would you advise? They replied, if today you will be a servant, Lord's Supper, no one washed the feet. Who got up and washed the feet? What does Jesus say? I've set for you an example. So here's some of the advice coming from the older guys. If you would be a servant, if you would have a demeanor of serving, think about 2020 here in a minute, and give them a favorable answer that you will reduce the taxes, they will be your servants. They'll always be your servants. But Rebi, he rejected the advice of the elders. Gave him the advice the elders gave him and consulted the young men who had grown up with him and were serving him. So let me draw a little picture for you. So we have, if Les were sitting here, and say, if I'm Rebi, I go to Les, what do you think? Should I lower the taxes? If you'll do that and be a servant, that'd be great. Well, then I'm going to go to someone younger. I'm going to go to, we don't have any. Go to Vic. Arlo, you're not younger than me. Go to your room. If I go to Vic and say, Vic, what do you think, dude? You grew up with me. What are we going to do here? So here's what they advised. He asked them, what is your advice? How should we answer these people who say to me, lighten the yoke your father put on us? The young men, Vic and the gang, who had grown up with him, replied, tell these people who have said to you, your father put a heavy yoke on us, but make our yoke lighter. Tell them, my little finger is thicker than my father's waist. My father laid on you a heavy yoke, I will make it heavier. You think taxes are bad now? You wait and see. My father scourged you with whips, I will scourge you with scorpions. We got to keep reading. 3 days later, Jeroboam and all the people returned to Rehoboam, as the king had said, come back to me in 3 days. The king answered the people harshly, rejecting the advice given by Les and the elders. He followed the advice of Vic and the gang. My father made your yoke heavy, I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips, I will scourge you with scorpions. So the king did not listen to the people, for this turn of events was from the Lord, to fulfill the word the Lord had spoken to Jeroboam, son of Nebat, through Abijah. You got to read all that. When all Israel saw that the king refused to listen to them, they answered the king. Here's their reply. What share do we have in David? What part in Jesse's son? To your tents, O Israel. Look after your own house, O David. So the Israelites went home. So now, you say, Greg, who cares? What are you doing? Who cares? I say this because right after that, you can read some other passages, we'll look at it a bit. But basically, there was a civil split. There were 2 tribes that stayed with Rebi, the new king. The 10 other tribes, now you have your divided, know anything about Bible history? The divided kingdom. Well, this is when it happens. This is why it happens. It's civil unrest because of taxation, because of a heavy hand. And they go, and Rebi and the other 2 south, I'm cutting out here. They go south. One of the results, and Sam, if you'll get ready to throw that map up there. One of the results of this split, and look down at verse 25. 12:25. Then we're going to get, this is all set up because I want to get to 1 point today. I don't have a 3-point sermon, I have 1 point. Verse 25. Then Jeroboam, see, he split. They split. Jeroboam fortified, well, I'm getting mixed up here in my words, yeah. You need to know this. There's Rehoboam, Reby, and then there's Jeroboam. Jerry. Ah. Sorry, kids, it's way over your heads. Most of my stuff is. That guy's crazy. That guy's stupid. There's Rehoboam and there's Jeroboam. Jeroboam previously, before Solomon died, Jeroboam tried to overthrow. There was an uprising. Well, he took the majority of the country. So you have Reby, who failed, and you have Jerry, who is the leader of the rebellion, is the leader of the other. He's the northern kingdom king. He goes north. Look at verse 25. Jeroboam, Jerry, fortified Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim and lived there. From there he went out and built up Peniel, these little suburbs of Palestine. Jeroboam, the rebel, thought to himself, the kingdom will now likely revert to the house of David. There's a high likelihood that even with this split, and even now I'm the king of this northern larger kingdom, they're still going to come back together. There's a split going on in America. A split that is deeper than I thought. And a split that is not apparently going to go away without some kind of significant change. I'm no prophet, but if the next 4 weeks go like the last 4 weeks, that's where we're going fairly significantly. There's a divide. There was a divide in the last election, 50-50 just about. There was a divide in the election prior. And this divide is just only increasing. But I've thought, and I still hope, that the United States will come back together and recognize that we are the United States of America. We're ruled by a constitution. We're one nation under God. However weak that sentence might be now, I still hope that, but maybe not, from what we're seeing. Jerry, he's basically saying, it's likely that they come back together. So I have to continue the division. Look here, because this is significant where Jesus goes. 5 more minutes and we're to our 1 point. Jeroboam fortified Shechem in the hill country and lived there. From there he went and built up Peniel. Jeroboam thought to himself, the kingdom will now likely revert to the house of David. We'll be back together, just like after the Civil War. If these people go up to offer sacrifices at the temple of the Lord, review, that Solomon built, that David wanted to build, that cost all kind of money, that is a very, very impressive building, they'll likely go up to Jerusalem, it's an elevation thing, and do that. And when they get around the temple and have the good romantic memories, they're like, we just belong together. Why are we fighting? So here's what he says. They will kill me and return to King Reby. I'm out if they come back together. After seeking advice, the king made 2 golden calves. Where have you heard that before? When Moses, this is now thousands of years ago, when Moses is up on Mount Sinai, he's long and coming down. Where's that Moses fellow? He's not. So give me your gold. Remember, and out popped this calf. So you have this 2 golden calves. He said to the people, it's too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Pfft, why do that long trip? Who wants to go all the way up to Pittsburgh? Like we can worship here in Uniontown. Here are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. So golden calves brought you out of Egypt. Bogus gods. I can't get too far into this political environment, this social environment that we're in. But I would love to have a handful of these leaders, whoever they are, and sit down and just do some logic with them. Do you really think? I made a road trip yesterday with family. It's a beautiful country. Do you really think that this just Big Bang evolved? No. So then how did this happen? Happened by God. Do you really think this country just kind of developed because of oppression of all kind of different people groups? No. When you look at real history, and I'm looking at you guys in school, when you look at real history, this country is founded on religious pilgrims. We want to worship God as we see fit. We don't want the Church of England to tell us how to worship God. It's a religious country. I want to sit down and tell these people that. And capitalism has created the most wealth in the history of mankind. And we've helped millions and millions of people by way of capitalism. I want to sit down and tell that. But it's all energy. It's all emotion. This guy calculates. I'll build these 2 calves and I'll tell you, Tim, there's your gods that led you out. You just forget King David and all his psalms that he wrote. You just forget that. Here's your God. And where did he build them? Geography is important. Verse 29. One he set up in Bethel. I'll show you here in a minute. Bethel is about 10 miles outside of Jerusalem, to the north. It's just about 10 miles north. So from here to less than Greensburg. Don't go all the way up to Greensburg. Go right here. Just stay right here. The other in Dan. Now, Sam, if you'll show me those maps. And I know, Kim, I know you're falling asleep. I know your husband's wearing his arm out, keeping you awake. And I know this. I know you're like, Greg, you love maps. Yes, I do. Geography is very, very important. Here is Jerusalem. Dead Sea. You can't get to Jerusalem without going uphill. All the way around. It's just uphill. It's just this up to worship. Well, where's Bethel? Where are the 2 golden calves? There's one right there. So all this country, this is where Jerry the rebel, this is where he's king. And this is where Solomon's son is king. Don't go all the way up to Jerusalem. You can go to Bethel, or you can go all the way up. This is where Samaria is back in the day. When Jesus was teaching, didn't happen back there yet. That doesn't happen yet. So this is all safe country. This is pleasant. Right there. Right there's where Dan is. What do you care, Greg? Look at your scripture. One he set up in Bethel, the other in Dan. And this thing became a sin. The people went even as far as Dan to worship the one there. The calf there. I want you to turn back to Matthew 16, and then I have one point and I'm done. Leave that up there, please, Sam. I'm telling you this, and I'll say it over and over again. I've said it before. Every word of Scripture feeds your soul. And I read right over a sentence that has incredible implication to what Jesus said and to where these temples, these gold things were built, and has application for us today. Matthew 16, verse 13. What's it say? When Jesus came. Well, let's just break the sentence down. That tells me that Jesus is leading the group. You ever wonder about the ministry of Christ? You wonder about those 3+ years? Who decided? Who made the decision? Let's go here, let's go there. Likely, most of the time, Jesus. And it's confirmed for us right here. You need to know, if you look here, This is Capernaum. It's not on this map because this is the Old Testament. This is 12 tribe stuff. There's Capernaum. Nazareth is over here. Jesus is raised basically here, but he makes his home office on the north shore of the Sea of Galilee. What do you care? That's 50% Gentile, 50% Jew by the time you get to the life of Christ. So he's already in this mixed city. You're in a mixed city. You have some people who believe that Jesus is the Son of God. You have some people who believe this stuff. And then you have others, and an increasing number of your neighbors that have no room for church, that have no room for God. Jesus has launched out of here numerous times. This is where Peter, James, and John, that's where they're fishermen from. This is likely where they get Matthew, the tax collector. Pretty big city, pretty big fishing town, and Matthew's sitting in there rolling in the coin, just like Joe yesterday, just rolling in cash. I have a video yesterday, Joe just rolling on the floor. Money, 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 money. Not true. I lied in church. This is where it all happened. Up here is the next chapter, your next port of Scripture, the Transfiguration, most likely. High. This is high. This is clear air. And from this vantage point, you can see the Sea of Galilee on a clear day. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, you want me to show you where Caesarea Philippi is? Are you curious yet? Kim, you still awake? Caesarea Philippi is right there. For Jesus and his gang to get where Peter says, "You're God," they have to go past one of those gold calves historical site. Kind of like if you go to Philly, my son lives 21 or 22 blocks. If you go from his house, if you go east 21 or 22 blocks, if you go up 20 blocks, you go to Independence Hall. Be like Jesus going to Independence Hall, or George Washington, or Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln going to Independence Hall is like, "Who do people say I am?" Jesus goes up to this town and says, "Who do people say I am?" Some say, oh, this prophet, that prophet, this prophet. And Peter goes, "You're the God, the living God." Because everybody knew, because of their history, everybody knew that when they passed there, it was an embarrassment. Well, that's where they worshiped a golden calf. Bogus. Lie. It didn't happen. Maybe they even got quiet as they're going through the region. Maybe they even talked about it, because not every word, John says, not every word that Jesus spoke or taught us is written. We couldn't write it all down. But you know how those trips go. You've been on hunting trips. You've been on road trips. You've been to PCTC. You know that, you give a review of what happened at you can't talk about what all happened. We were looking through pictures the other day, like how many weeks at camp, too many. I can't review all that. Tommy, I have pictures of you guys at Keystone. Vic playing cards, Tommy eating a marshmallow. Some things never change. Who knows, but they didn't walk by. When they walked by there, goes, "This is an embarrassment, huh, Jesus?" Oh, more than you know. Our culture has exchanged Jesus Christ. Here's my point. They have exchanged Jesus Christ for a golden calf of whatever they think. And it's not working. And it won't work. We are a nation founded on the providence of a living and loving God. And we're walking away from that and ignoring that, and it will not last. It's already not been lasting as we've been eroding for the last 50 years. But now, much like that Jeep, it's going to tumble and tumble and tumble and be worse than where we started in January. Who knows what January 21 is going to be? But I can tell you this. The gates of Hades will not prevail against this. Whatever. And if you think I'm saying as a Republican to a Democrat, that's not, you don't know my religion or my political party affiliation. Don't claim you do. I'm not talking politics. I'm talking society. That we have made a calf out of our own leadership, and we've walked away from godly leadership in whatever form. Because there'll be Democrats in heaven, there'll be Republicans in heaven. Don't you think about political party. You think about, I believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. That's where I stand. Now, you're back to Matthew 16, my point, and then we're done. Verse 24, 16:24 of Matthew. Then Jesus said to his disciples, after he kind of silenced this objection or bad advice from Peter, if anyone would come after me, I looked at red earlier, so I'll go back to red. Red, if you want to follow me, you must deny yourself and take up your cross. We think about the cross. This is a cross I made when I was probably 15 years old. And I made it in metal shop. Remember, we used to have shop class in schools. I made it in metal shop, and I got the clump of metal from I don't even know his name. I forget his first name. Mr. Fedorchuk. He worked at Westinghouse Electric, and it's nickel chromium. This is stuff he wasn't supposed to let out of the shop. It's incredible, heavy. And it took, just cutting this took like 4 or 5 hacksaw blades, power hacksaw. I made this as jewelry. If you'll roll that screen up, Sam. You've probably seen it so many times, you forget seeing it. What's hanging up there? A cross. We treat the cross like jewelry. My metal shop teacher, who was a biker dude, who was a hippie, but had converted in his 30s, and he pulled me aside, he goes, Mr. Pelk, are you making that for real, or are you making that to be cool? That was a good question. And we look at this, and I've seen pictures from our directories of years ago. This cross has been hanging here a long time. And it kind of halfway fell down. About 3 years ago, Joe hung it back up. We don't think about the cross other than jewelry or around communion time. If you want to follow me, you must deny yourself, take up your death instrument, and follow me. Galatians chapter 2. Galatians chapter 2. I'm going to take the time to set it up with the book of Galatians. Look here. We have been talking about Jesus, Caesarea Philippi, halfway through his ministry. Go a couple years ahead. Now Jesus has been crucified, buried, resurrected, ascension. You go to church, Acts chapter 2, the church is taken off. The church in a town called Galatia had just like blown into super size. It was just awesome growing church. And all of a sudden they began to stumble and they were being held back. And Paul found out. Paul helped found the church. And Paul found out about it. He goes, what's going on? You were doing so well. Well, someone snuck in with some false teaching. We have to be very careful. Very, very careful of the false teaching. Like Joe rolling in cash, that was a lie. That was a lie. You have to be careful of the lies in church. One of the groups of lies coming out of this church in Galatia was, whoa. You don't have all this freedom in Christ. You have to practice some Judaism. You have to be a Jew. You have to be a good Jew and do sacrifices. And you can't eat meat that's been... And Paul's like, no. It's Jesus and the freedom in Christ. In that environment, Paul says this, chapter 2, verse 20. And Paul's a go-getter. Paul is like Mr. Business Builder. Paul, I have been crucified with Christ. I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. Can you say that? Is your life still about you? Be honest. Is the life of our little society explosion right now? It's all about themselves. What about? What about? What about me? What about me? When you look at the economy of God, what about you? Romans 14, and then I'm done. Romans 14. If you don't want to turn there, that's fine. I'll read it for you. Romans 14, verse 8. And since I've been picking on red, I'll keep it up. Red, if we live to the Lord. And if we die to the Lord. So, whether we live or die, we belong to Black Lives Matter. We belong to American Eagles Club. We belong to the Veterans Club. We belong to the Vanderbilt Church of Christ. Whether we live or die, we belong to Christ. What did Christ do? Lived his life as a living sacrifice to the point where right before he gets killed, he's shining shoes. What about you this past week? Barry, you weren't here. It was a Wednesday night. Nancy was here. Mike was here sleeping as usual. Tim was here. There were 3 or 4 or 5 other people here. And we talked about what if we did accountability. And I picked on you and your wife, and I picked on you and your wife. I said, what if, instead of greeting each other Sunday morning and, hey, how are you, and we did like a level 1 thing, what if all of a sudden we brought Barry right front and center and said, what have you done for the kingdom in the last 3 days? As if your food depended on it. Like, we're not going to give you lunch until you tell us what you've done. Well, I've mowed at camp. I've done it. Okay, good. Donna, what have you done for the kingdom? What if we had that kind of accountability to each other? Alan, what have you done? Well, I've had to drive all over Jersey. These 4-wheelers, they drive me. Yep. What have you done for the kingdom while you're out in Jersey? And I look right at you guys. Church. Yeah, sometimes it's fun. Most of the times it's boring. You go on forever, Greg. You and your stupid maps. Just like Vic used to say. The church doesn't exist for you to have fun. We hope to have fun. I hope that's a good byproduct. But it's not about you. It's not about you being in Jersey. What have you done for the kingdom? And you can answer that way, way better than I can. But if you stood before the Lord to give an account, and all of a sudden this Caesarea Philippi, like, it's not about a golden calf. It's about the living God. Let's stand. We're going